Hello and welcome to VPI Conversations, a video series investigating the virtual public involvement practices that state and local agencies use for transportation planning and project development. VPI Conversations is part of the Federal Highway Administration's Virtual Public Involvement Program, an Everyday Counts initiative. My name is Jim Thorne, and I'm with the Federal Highway Office of Planning, and today I'll be speaking with Susan Keene, State Location and Design Engineer, and Shane Sawyer, Multimodal Programs Manager at the Virginia Department of Transportation, about the institutionalization of VPI and VPI strategies for planning, project development, and environmental review. So, Susan and Shane, can you tell us a little bit about the Virginia DOT and your role there?
As the state location design engineer, I oversee the project development process all the way from planning, where we receive our handoff with a well-defined project typically, all the way through construction advertisement.
I am the Multimodal Programs Manager within VDOT's Transportation and Mobility Planning Division. So we are in charge of conducting a range of transportation planning studies quite early in the process of developing various alternatives to improve transportation within the Commonwealth.
So could you share a little bit about the Virginia DOT and your experiences with virtual public involvement? Maybe how you got started with VPI and what the agency's goals are.
In December of 2019, VDOT hosted an FHWA peer exchange on VPI, which was part of its EDC 5 initiative. And this peer exchange brought together state DOTs and other planning agencies from around the country to share their experiences and lessons learned regarding VPI.
The pandemic for VDOT really pushed us into the virtual public involvement realm. We, wanted to make sure that our audience was safe and secure in being able to provide that input, and virtual public involvement really added that level of safety and security for our participants. But not only that, it also allowed us to continue with our plan and project development.
Great, thanks for that. So could you talk a little bit about your process for exploring and implementing various VPI tools?
Typically, virtual public involvement has been a supplement to our face-to-face hearings. But as I said, with the pandemic, it had really pushed it to the forefront where we weren't necessarily triggering a public hearing for NEPA. We did have to have that virtual design hearing to satisfy Virginia State Code.
Based in large part on what we learned from the FHWA peer exchange, we were able to incorporate a range of tools, online surveys, virtual meetings, and just other means of public participation. So we incorporated VPI into all of our planning studies and outreach efforts.
Sounds like Virginia DOT has piloted a number of VPI strategies and recently expanded its virtual public involvement toolkit. Could you just summarize some of the VPI tools that you all use?
On the design side, we have been using WebEx for two-way communication for our virtual design hearings. We have utilized Google Meets, video PowerPoint presentations with voiceover, put those out on YouTube, promote those on social media, whether it's Facebook or Instagram or on Twitter, to reach that wider audience with our virtual public involvement pieces.
Even before we were heavy into VPI, we always created a project website, a page for every planning study or every project that we were working on. We have also used ArcGIS Online to develop some story maps to kind of get the word out on what the project is about, and also to do some visualizations of our survey responses.
How does the Virginia DOT determine the best VPI strategy to implement for a particular project?
We do utilize our resident engineers, and they are our boots on the ground for project development. They understand their community, and they understand the desire for the level of public involvement that is needed for a design hearing related to a specific project. We use that in conjunction with working with environmental division and communications to establish that communications plan.
Could you share a little bit about the types of projects that you've used VPI to support? For example, whether it's been in project development or planning or environmental review, and maybe some specific examples of plans or projects where you've successfully used VPI.
We have used it on what we would consider smaller, more local corridor studies, which may be just a couple mile section of road. We've used them on statewide studies, such as a statewide commuter survey. Also, we've used them on larger projects, such as interstate projects. And we have also used them on alternative transportation studies, such as bicycle and pedestrian and trail planning studies. So we've used them on a range of different types of studies.
So VDOT has worked with our federal highway partners to develop the process to where if a public hearing is triggered under NEPA, we still utilize face-to-face, but we add the virtual public involvement component. For an example, we just completed an EIS document, level document for the Martinsville connector, where we did utilize an in-person component, but we also provided that virtual public involvement tool as a supplement to that face-to-face hearing in order to better reach our community and keep folks safe. So we have successfully had one full virtual public design hearing for a state-funded project that was on new location. We used a public involvement strategy using the social media, but we also used WebEx to carry out a full two-way communication with our stakeholders and surrounding communities.
How has Virginia DOT institutionalized virtual public involvement into your process, both within planning and project development and environmental review?
So Virginia worked with our federal partners to outline that process for utilizing virtual public involvement either as a supplement for the NEPA required public hearings or to utilize virtual public involvement to meet our Virginia code with a virtual public design hearing. We have institutionalized in the fact that we have added that agreement as an addendum to our public involvement manual, and we have issued guidance as a learning document and as a living document to be updated with lessons learned. We also put guidance out as far as the toolbox to use and how to approach each project and develop that individual communication plan, working with the local folks in the residency, environmental, and communications to make sure that we're reaching our stakeholders.
Communications has developed some forms that we use to request certain VPI tools. We've developed templates that we use for presentations and requirements for the technical requirements for videos and presentations to make sure that they are not just outrageously large to where no one could download them. So again, basically it comes down to a lot of internal coordination to ensure that what's happening on one study will happen on another. And just to make sure there is a consistent process that everyone is familiar with.
How have you used VPI to reach underrepresented communities, such as individuals with disabilities, environmental justice, or low English proficiency communities?
We are looking at opportunities to ensure that internet connections are provided at the local libraries for that virtual public involvement or virtual design hearing that we may hold.
When we do a survey, we try to go back in and analyze, compare our responses against census data to make sure that we are getting something that approximates a representative sampling. We have the capability of translating our surveys into additional languages as needed.
Shane, can you tell us about your use of online surveys and perhaps how those surveys have been used to inform projects?
Even if we do have a traditional public information meeting, we always pair it with an online survey. A lot of folks may not want to provide input at the meeting, or they may want to study the material before they provide input. So it's not only a public input tool, but it's also a public education tool.
So do you have any tips in terms of how you design surveys to get meaningful public input?
You should try to keep these surveys relatively short. Again, we have found that participation tends to decrease with longer surveys, so we may not get as much information on the latter questions versus the questions that are asked earlier on in the process. Or make the surveys to where they are a bit interactive. Click on a box to vote for something or to drop a map marker onto a map versus just going in and typing tons of text.
How does the Virginia DOT pair in-person techniques with its online meetings?
In Northern Virginia, we have a 495 Next, which is our express lane extension. They're actually doing question and answer sessions off the record, answering questions, working with the community to get those questions answered prior to the hearing. And then we will actually host the virtual public design meeting, but in order to address some of those questions that they may have resulting from the project so that they're prepped and ready to comment when it comes to the virtual design hearing.
So have you experienced any challenges with the use of VPI strategies and perhaps some lessons learned along the way?
For lessons learned, I think the biggest thing was practicing ahead of time, knowing your technology, understanding your audience, and ensuring that you're thinking ahead of what questions may be asked so that you can have that information at your fingertips.
So what are your plans moving forward with virtual public involvement in Virginia?
We're looking into a one-stop shop as far as a platform that can have all the pieces that fit together for the public involvement from the planning stages with the surveys to the comment resolution and displaying those projects to the public through a single platform. The more that we can standardize and utilize a single platform, the more consistent we will be throughout the state and ensuring that we're reaching the stakeholders in a very consistent method.
Now that you've had this experience with virtual public involvement, what tips or advice would you give to someone just starting out with VPI?
You can always improve the process, but you got to get started somewhere. And again, you don't have to go 100% virtual initially. You can take smaller steps. And again, it is a learning process. So you got to start somewhere, start small, and scale up as appropriate.
I don't think that utilizing the VPI as a supplement to the face-to-face hearings is a bad way to start. I think you'll get a very clear understanding of the level of engagement and the outreach that VPI provides.
Thank you again to Susan Keene and Shane Sawyer of Virginia DOT for speaking with us today. If you want to watch more of VPI Conversations or learn more about virtual public involvement strategies, please visit the website on the screen or click the link in the description. Thanks for joining us.